Tonight, we explore the worst kings in history, a royal lineup of rulers who truly put the crown in clown. This journey takes you through history's most questionable monarchs, including kings who believed taxes were a form of affection, and those who waged wars for the thrill of it, and lost. So buckle up, Your Majesty, because these kings might just make you grateful you're not wearing the crown yourself. So before you get comfortable as always, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you want to support the History and Sleep crew. Also, let us know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. I personally think this lineup is spotless, so turn your lights off, grab that warm blanket, and let's start. When we think of kings, our minds conjure images of wise Solomon, brave Arthur, or noble Henry, the fifth leading charge at Agincourt. But for every ruler who earned their place in history's Hall of Fame, there's another who stumbled spectacularly into its Hall of Shame. These monarchs didn't just fail, they failed with such remarkable consistency that their reigns became cautionary tales whispered in palace corridors for centuries. The crown, that golden circle of ultimate authority, has adorned some truly unworthy heads throughout history. It's a peculiar irony that the symbol of divine right and earthly power often sat atop minds incapable of ruling a chicken coop, let alone vast kingdoms. Perhaps it's the very nature of hereditary monarchy that creates this problem. After all, leadership skills don't necessarily pass through bloodlines like blue eyes or prominent noses. Consider the fundamental challenge these men faced. Inheriting absolute power in their teens or 20s, surrounded by sycophants whose livelihoods depended on agreeing with every royal whim, no matter how catastrophically stupid. It's akin to entrusting a teenager with the keys to both a Ferrari and a nuclear reactor, then reacting with surprise when things go awry. The worst kings in history share certain characteristics that transcend times and cultures. They possessed an almost supernatural ability to make the wrong decision in any given situation, as if guided by some malevolent compass that always pointed toward disaster. They combined breathtaking arrogance with staggering incompetence, creating a perfect storm of royal dysfunction that left their subjects longing for the glorious old days of plague and famine. What makes these rulers particularly fascinating isn't just their individual failures, but how their collective incompetence shaped the very nature of monarchy itself. Each spectacular royal meltdown contributed to the gradual erosion of the divine right of kings, proving that perhaps God wasn't quite as involved in royal succession as previously advertised. Their reigns served as stark reminders of the corrupting nature of absolute power and the impracticality of having a single individual make all the decisions for millions of people. The stories of these monarchical disasters aren't just historical curiosities. They're mirrors reflecting fundamental truths about leadership, power, and human nature. They remind us that position doesn't create competence, that authority without wisdom is chaos with a crown, and that sometimes the most important service a ruler can provide their people is a swift abdication. From the decadent palaces of Rome to the drafty castles of medieval Europe, from the elaborate courts of France to the fog-shrouded fortresses of England, these kings managed to transform their realms into laboratories of misrule. They proved that it's entirely possible to inherit everything and achieve nothing, to possess unlimited power and accomplish unlimited damage. Their reigns weren't just political failures, they were comprehensive disasters that touched every aspect of their societies. They mismanaged economics with the enthusiasm of toddlers playing with matches, conducted diplomacy with all the subtlety of a bulldozer in a china shop, and approached military strategy with the tactical acumen of lemmings approaching a cliff. Yet perhaps there's something oddly comforting about these royal train wrecks. In an age where we're constantly told about the importance of leadership and excellence, these monarchs remind us that even people with every possible advantage can fail spectacularly. They serve as living examples of how incompetence can hire anyone regardless of their social status, inherited wealth, or divine mandate. As we embark on this journey through history's most magnificent failures, we'll discover that bad kingship is a unique art form, requiring a particular combination of ego, ignorance, and timing that few have mastered so completely. Nero Claudius Caesar, Augustus Germanicus, a name so grandiose it practically demanded disappointment, ruled Rome from 54 to 68 AD and managed to transform the mightiest empire in the world into his personal theatre of absurdity. History remembers him for allegedly fiddling while Rome burned, though historians now tell us he probably didn't own a fiddle and wasn't even in the city during the Great Fire of 64 AD. But when your reputation for catastrophic leadership runs so deep that people invent additional disasters to attribute to you, perhaps it's time for some serious self-reflection. Nero's path to power began with his mother, Agrippina, a woman whose ambition made Lady Macbeth look like a casual weekend warrior. She poisoned her husband, Emperor Claudius, to secure the throne for her 16-year-old son, apparently operating under the delusion that teenagers make excellent absolute rulers. It was rather like handing the controls of a jumbo jet to someone who'd just gotten their learner's permit. Initially, Nero showed promise, guided by the philosopher Seneca and the praetorian prefect Burrus. For 5 years, the Quinquennium Nerones represented competent governance, proving that even future disasters can occasionally stumble into success when surrounded by competent advisors. Unfortunately, like many teenagers who initially accept parental guidance, Nero eventually decided he knew better than everyone else in the room. The transformation began when Nero discovered his true passion, performing. His passion lay not in governing, nor in military strategy, nor in economic policy, but in performing. He fancied. He considered himself a great artist, musician and actor, apparently confusing the role of emperor with that of an entertainer. He began appearing on the stage, competing in chariot races, and hosting elaborate artistic competitions where he invariably won every prize, because nothing says fair competition like having the power to execute the judges. His artistic pretensions might have been merely embarrassing if they hadn't come at the expense of actual leadership. While Nero practiced his lyre and rehearsed tragic soliloquies, the empire's borders faced increasing pressure from Germanic tribes, British rebels and Parthian conflicts. It was rather like a ship's captain deciding to take up interpretive dance while his vessel sailed through a hurricane. The domestic situation proved equally disastrous. Nero's paranoia reached spectacular heights when he ordered the murder of his mother in 59 AD. Agrippina had become inconveniently critical of her son's policies, apparently forgetting that criticism and absolute monarchy mix about as well as gasoline and lit matches. Nero's solution demonstrated the kind of problem-solving skills that would make a medieval surgeon look sophisticated. His relationship with his wives proved equally catastrophic. He divorced and later executed his first wife Octavia, then literally kicked his second wife Poppaea to death while she was pregnant. These actions were calculated and not motivated by passion, indicating a level of domestic dysfunction that would challenge even the most experienced marriage counsellors. The Great Fire of Rome in 64 AD, whether Nero caused it or not, provided the perfect opportunity to showcase his unique approach to crisis management. Rather than focusing solely on relief efforts, he used the destruction as an excuse to build his enormous palace, the Domus Aurea, complete with a 120-foot statue of himself. This was urban planning executed by a narcissist, as if someone had granted Donald Trump absolute power along with a blank canvas the size of a city. Nero's financial management followed similar principles of spectacular irresponsibility. His building projects, games, and artistic competitions drained the imperial treasury faster than a teenager with their first credit card. He responded to budget shortfalls by debasing the currency and confiscating property from wealthy citizens, economic policies that would make modern politicians blush. The end came swiftly when his Praetorian Guard abandoned him in 68 AD. Facing rebellion from his generals and certain death or exile, Nero committed suicide, reportedly lamenting, "What an artist dies in me." Even in his final moments, he remained committed to the delusion that his primary contribution to human civilization was artistic rather than administrative. Nero's reign demonstrated that absolute power in the hands of someone who confuses governance with performance art creates a particularly devastating form of chaos. He proved that it's entirely possible to possess unlimited authority over millions of people while remaining fundamentally unsuited for any form of responsibility more complex than choosing breakfast cereal. King John of England, reigning from 1199 to 1216, holds the unique distinction of being the only English monarch to never have another king named after him, a historical rejection that amply demonstrates his enduring legacy. If royal names were performance reviews, John received the equivalent of "please don't apply here again." He managed to lose an empire, bankrupt a kingdom, and accidentally create one of history's most important constitutional documents, all while maintaining the kind of spectacular incompetence that makes you wonder if failure was actually his secret talent. John inherited the Angevin Empire from his brother Richard the Lionheart, a collection of territories stretching from Scotland to the Pyrenees that represented the pinnacle of medieval English power. It was rather like inheriting a successful family business and immediately deciding to use it as kindling. Within 15 years, John had lost most of these continental possessions to Philip Augustus of France, earning himself the nickname Lackland, though couldn't keep land might have been more accurate. Not only was the loss of Normandy in 1284 a military defeat, but it also served as a lesson in the art of conducting medieval warfare. Despite having superior resources, experienced commanders, and defensive advantages, John managed to snatch defeat from the brink of victory through a combination of strategic incompetence and tactical cowardice. His approach to military leadership resembled someone trying to win chess by eating the pieces. John's domestic policies proved equally disastrous. He demanded excessive taxes to fund his unsuccessful attempts to reclaim his French territories, essentially asking his subjects to finance their oppression. His tax collectors became as popular as plague carriers and about as welcome in English villages. The king seemed to operate under the revolutionary economic theory that money grows on trees, and those trees belonged exclusively to him. His relationship with the church provided another avenue for spectacular failure. John's dispute with Pope Innocent III over the appointment of the Archbishop of Canterbury resulted in England being placed under papal interdict from 1208 to 1214. This process meant no religious services, no church weddings, and no proper burials, essentially turning England into a spiritual wasteland. It was ecclesiastical warfare, with John playing the role of the person who brings a water pistol to a gunfight. The interdict wasn't just spiritually devastating, it was politically catastrophic. Medieval people took their religion seriously, and a king who couldn't maintain proper relations with God's representative on earth was clearly unsuited for earthly leadership. John had managed to make himself persona non grata with both heaven and earth simultaneously, an achievement that required genuine dedication to incompetence. John's judicial system operated on principles that would make modern autocrats blush. He sold justice to the highest bidder, imprisoned nobles without trial, and seized property on whims that would make a toddler's decision-making process look measured and thoughtful. His courts became marketplaces where justice was auctioned to the highest bidder, creating a legal system that combined the fairness of a rigged casino with the efficiency of medieval bureaucracy. The baronial revolt that produced Magna Carta in 1215 wasn't a sudden explosion of democratic idealism. It was the inevitable result of years of accumulated grievances against a king who treated his realm like his personal piggy bank. The barons were not revolutionary democrats, but rather, they were aristocrats who had grown weary of their supposed leader's systematic robbery and humiliation. The Magna Carta itself represented less a triumph of John's wisdom than a testament to his failure. The document essentially forced the king to promise to stop behaving like a complete tyrant, which tells you everything you need to know about his previous conduct. It was the medieval equivalent of making someone sign a contract promising not to steal your lunch money. Even after agreeing to the Magna Carta, John immediately began scheming to overturn it, proving that his signature was worth approximately as much as Confederate currency. He appealed to Pope Innocent III, who obligingly declared the charter null and void because apparently both king and pope had missed the point entirely. These events led to the First Barons' War, which was still ongoing when John conveniently died in 1216, possibly from dysentery, a fitting end for a reign that had been largely consistent from a constitutional perspective. John's legacy proves that sometimes the most important historical contributions come from people who fail so spectacularly that they force everyone else to create safeguards against future similar disasters. He didn't create Magna Carta through wisdom or foresight. He created it through being so comprehensively awful that his subjects had no choice but to invent constitutional monarchy as an alternative to royal tyranny. In 1774, Louis XVI of France ascended to the throne with the same enthusiasm as someone asked to defuse a bomb while blindfolded. At 20 years old, he inherited a kingdom drowning in debt, seething with social tension, and groaning under the weight of an outdated feudal system that had outlived its usefulness by about 3 centuries. It was rather like being handed the captain's wheel of the Titanic just as the lookout spotted the iceberg, except the iceberg had been visible for decades and everyone had been politely pretending it wasn't there. The young king possessed many admirable personal qualities. He was kind, well-intentioned, and genuinely concerned about his subjects' welfare. Unfortunately, he also possessed the decisive leadership abilities of a confused deer caught in headlights, which proved somewhat problematic when governing a nation on the brink of revolution. Louis XVI wasn't evil or malicious. He he was simply catastrophically unsuited for the job, like appointing a talented musician to perform brain surgery. France's financial crisis had been building for generations, fueled by expensive wars, an inefficient tax system, and the kind of court spending that would make modern celebrities look frugal. The monarchy had borrowed money with the same casual enthusiasm that teenagers use credit cards, apparently operating under the assumption that debt was something that happened to other people. By the time Louis XVI inherited the throne, France was spending more on debt service than on the entire military, which created the kind of fiscal situation that would make bankruptcy attorneys salivate. The king's attempts at financial reform demonstrated his fundamental misunderstanding of both economics and politics. He appointed competent finance ministers like Jacques Necker and Charles-Alexandre de Calonne, then systematically undermined their efforts whenever they threatened the privileges of the nobility or clergy. It was rather like hiring a personal trainer and then refusing to exercise or change your diet, while wondering why you weren't getting healthier. Louis XVI's indecisiveness became legendary among his contemporaries. He would agree to reforms in the morning, reconsider them by afternoon, and reverse them entirely by evening, creating a governmental process that resembled a political weather vane in a hurricane. His council meetings became exercises in elaborate procrastination, where every decision was discussed, debated, postponed, and ultimately abandoned in favour of discussing the same issues again next week. Louis XVI demonstrated his exceptional political acumen at the Assembly of Notables in 1787. Faced with a financial crisis that threatened the monarchy's existence, he convened a gathering of nobles and clergy to discuss tax reform, apparently expecting them to voluntarily surrender their tax exemptions out of patriotic spirit. It was roughly equivalent to asking wolves to babysit sheep, while expecting them to resist temptation out of professional courtesy. When that predictably failed, Louis XVI made the fateful decision to convene the Estates General for the first time since 1614, apparently not realising that 3 centuries of accumulated grievances might produce some awkward conversations. The Estates General had been dormant for so long that nobody even remembered the proper procedures, which should have been a warning sign that perhaps this wasn't the ideal moment for constitutional innovation. Louis XVI was completely unprepared for the transformation of the Estates General into the National Assembly, as if he had anticipated a small dinner party but inadvertently invited the entire neighbourhood. His response to this constitutional revolution demonstrated the kind of crisis management skills that would make the captain of the Hindenburg look competent. He vacillated between accepting the new reality and attempting to resist it, satisfying nobody and convincing everyone that he was either duplicitous or incompetent. Louis XVI's flight to Varennes in 1791 represented perhaps the most poorly planned escape attempt in royal history. The royal family's journey to the Austrian border involved a conspicuous carriage, multiple stops, and the kind of operational security that would embarrass amateur shoplifters. They were recognised, captured and returned to Paris, where any remaining illusions about the king's commitment to constitutional monarchy evaporated faster than morning dew in August. The king's trial and execution in 1793 marked the end of more than a millennium of French monarchy, though Louis XVI seemed genuinely surprised that years of indecision and apparent duplicity might have consequences. His final speech from the scaffold demonstrated the same disconnection from reality that had characterised his entire reign, as he continued to believe that divine right trumped revolutionary fervour. Louis XVI's tragedy wasn't that he was evil, but that he was fundamentally inadequate for the challenges he faced. He possessed the political instincts of a librarian thrust into a cage match with professional wrestlers, and the results were precisely what you'd expect. His reign proved that good intentions without competent execution can be more destructive than a malicious competence, and that sometimes the road to revolution is paved with royal indecision. Richard III of England ruled for barely 2 years, from 1483 to 1485, yet managed to pack more controversy, alleged villainy and historical debate into that brief period than most monarchs accumulate in decades. Thanks largely to William Shakespeare's masterful character assassination, Richard has come down to us as the archetypal evil king, a hunchbacked schemer who murdered his way to the throne and terrorised his subjects until divine justice finally caught up with him at Bosworth Field. Historians have discovered that the reality of Richard's reign is considerably more complex, and it may have been worse than Shakespeare's portrayal, albeit in different ways. Richard began his royal career as the loyal younger brother of Edward IV, earning a reputation as a competent military commander and administrator in the north of England. He seemed destined for the kind of supporting role that history barely remembers. the capable royal sibling who holds down the provinces while his brother handles the glamorous business of actually being king. Unfortunately for everyone involved, Edward IV had the poor timing to die young, leaving behind 2 minor sons and a realm that was about as politically stable as a house of cards in a windstorm. The succession crisis that followed Edward IV's death in 1483 showcased medieval politics at its most brutally efficient. Richard, as Lord Protector for his 12-year-old nephew Edward V, faced the challenge of maintaining royal authority while various factions manoeuvred for control. His solution showcased a direct approach that would astonish modern politicians. He declared his nephews illegitimate and asserted his own claim to the throne. With just one well-timed announcement, he masterfully transformed a family dispute into a constitutional crisis. The infamous disappearance of the princes in the Tower, Edward V and his younger brother Richard, remains one of history's most enduring mysteries, though contemporary opinion held Richard responsible with the kind of certainty usually reserved for mathematical theorems. Whether he actually ordered their deaths or simply failed to prevent them, the political damage was immediate and catastrophic. A king who couldn't protect children in his care wasn't likely to inspire confidence in his ability to protect an entire kingdom. Richard's attempts to legitimise his reign were steeped in the time-honoured tradition of royal propaganda, albeit with the subtlety of a medieval siege engine. He claimed divine approval, noble blood, and popular support while simultaneously dealing with rebellions, defections, and the kind of general unrest that suggested his subjects weren't entirely convinced by his arguments. His coronation was magnificent, his public relations were enthusiastic, and his actual support base was shrinking faster than his list of living relatives. The Buckingham Rebellion in 1483, led by one of Richard's former supporters, demonstrated how quickly political allegiances could shift in late medieval England. Henry Stafford, Duke of Buckingham, went from enthusiastic supporter to armed rebel in the space of months, apparently deciding that Richard's leadership style was less strong and decisive and more terrifying and unstable. The rebellion ultimately failed, demonstrating the fragility of Richard's hold on power. Richard's administrative policies showed genuine competence, which makes his political failures all the more remarkable. He implemented legal reforms, encouraged trade, and attempted to address some of the social issues that had plagued previous reigns. It was rather like watching someone efficiently organise their desk while their house burned down around them. Technically impressive, but missing the larger point about priorities and crisis management. The invasion of Henry Tudor in 1485 caught Richard in a classic medieval dilemma. He could fight and risk everything in a single battle, or he could negotiate and risk appearing weak to supporters who expected their king to solve problems with sharp objects. Richard chose to fight, demonstrating either admirable courage or catastrophic misjudgment, depending on your perspective on the virtues of tactical retreat versus glorious death. The Battle of Bosworth Field became Richard's final performance review, and the results were decisively negative. His death in battle, reportedly fighting bravely to the end, at least provided him with the kind of dramatic conclusion that Shakespeare would later appreciate. Richard died as he had ruled, dramatically, controversially, and with enough ambiguity to keep historians arguing for centuries. The discovery of Richard's remains in 2012 under a Leicester parking lot provided a fitting metaphor for his historical reputation. Buried, forgotten, and covered over by the mundane concerns of daily life. The forensic evidence verified that Richard possessed a curved spine, albeit not the dramatic hunchback portrayed in Shakespearean legends. It was a final reminder that the truth about Richard III lies somewhere between the monster of popular imagination and the competent administrator of revisionist history. Richard III's reign proves that in politics, perception often matters more than reality, and that a brief but dramatic failure can overshadow decades of competent service. He remains history's most famous 2-year disaster, a king whose reign was so brief and troubled that it became a cautionary tale about the dangers of combining ambition with poor judgment and worse timing. The discovery of Richard's remains in 2012 under a Leicester parking lot provided a fitting metaphor for his historical reputation. Buried, forgotten, and covered over by the mundane concerns of daily life. The forensic evidence verified that Richard possessed a curved spine, albeit not the dramatic hunchback portrayed in Shakespearean legends. It was a final reminder that the truth about Richard III lies somewhere between the monster of popular imagination and the competent administrator of revisionist history. Richard III's reign proves that in politics, perception often matters more than reality, and that a brief but dramatic failure can overshadow decades of competent service. he remains history's most famous 2-year disaster, a king whose reign was so brief and troubled that it became a cautionary tale about the dangers of combining ambition with poor judgment and worse timing. During this period, the king's financial strategies demonstrated a level of fiscal creativity that would leave modern tax authorities in awe. Originally an emergency naval tax for coastal counties, the reasoning behind the extension of ship money to inland areas would challenge the flexibility of Olympic gymnasts. Charles apparently discovered that if you squinted hard enough at legal precedents while ignoring common sense entirely, you could justify almost any form of taxation. Religious policy provided another avenue for Charles to demonstrate his talent for turning manageable problems into catastrophic crises. His attempts to impose uniformity on the Church of England, influenced by Archbishop Laud's high church preferences, managed to alienate both Puritans who thought he was too Catholic and Catholics who knew he wasn't Catholic enough. This approach was ecumenical diplomacy executed with a sledgehammer, achieving the remarkable feat of uniting his religious subjects against his policies. The Scottish crisis from 1639 to 1640 perfectly illustrated Charles's approach to international relations. His attempt to impose the English Book of Common Prayer on Presbyterian Scotland produced the Bishops' Wars, conflicts that combined the military effectiveness of a church social with the theological intensity of the Crusades. The Scots' armed resistance to Charles's religious innovations forced him to recall Parliament, ending his 11-year experiment in personal rule with all the success of the Hindenburg's landing strategy. The Long Parliament, summoned in 1640, approached its relationship with Charles rather like divorce attorneys negotiating with a spouse who'd been hiding assets. Years of accumulated grievances, illegal taxation, and religious controversy had created a constitutional crisis that required either genuine compromise or complete capitulation. Charles, characteristically, opted for a third course of action, disguising the crisis as non-existent while clandestinely strategizing its resolution through coercion. The king's attempt to arrest 5 members of Parliament in 1642 represented perhaps the most catastrophic miscalculation in English constitutional history. His personal invasion of the House of Commons, demanding the surrender of his political opponents, violated parliamentary privilege so flagrantly that it made previous constitutional disputes look like minor etiquette disagreements. This situation was politically equivalent to bringing a gun to a chess match, and it was just as ineffective. The English Civil War that followed from 1642 to 1651 showcased Charles's military leadership skills, which proved to be roughly equivalent to his political acumen. Despite initial advantages in resources and experienced commanders, the Royalist cause gradually collapsed under the weight of parliamentary determination, Puritan fervour, and Oliver Cromwell's increasingly professional New Model army. Charles managed to lose a civil war while possessing most of the traditional advantages of established authority, which required genuine dedication to strategic incompetence. Charles's trial and execution in 1649 marked the first time in European history that a reigning monarch was formally tried and executed by his subjects. Even his enemies were impressed by his dignity during the proceedings, despite it being a late attempt to salvage his political reputation. Even as the executioner prepared to provide a definitive counter-argument to that constitutional theory, the king maintained his belief in divine right in his final speech. Charles I's reign demonstrated that sincerely held beliefs about royal authority, when combined with complete inflexibility and poor political judgment, can transform a constitutional monarchy into a republic faster than anyone thought possible. He proved that divine right is only as strong as earthly support, and that sometimes the most devout believers in absolute monarchy are the ones who do the most to discredit it. The rogues gallery of royal disasters we've examined, from Nero's theatrical delusions to Charles I's divine miscalculations, reveals patterns of failure that transcend centuries and cultures. These weren't random accidents of heredity or cruel twists of historical fate. They were systematic demonstrations of how absolute power, when combined with inadequate wisdom, creates a perfect storm of governmental dysfunction. Their collective reigns read like a medieval instruction manual titled How Not to Rule, a Comprehensive Guide to Royal Failure. Perhaps the most striking common thread among these monarchical disasters was their profound disconnection from reality. Each king seemed to inhabit a parallel universe where their subjects existed primarily to fund their fantasies, where criticism was treason, and where the normal laws of cause and effect somehow didn't apply to royal decisions. Nero believed he was an artist first and emperor second. John thought taxation was a renewable resource. Louis XVI imagined that ignoring problems would make them disappear. Richard III assumed loyalty was transferable, and Charles I was convinced that God would override Parliament if necessary. This reality gap wasn't just a personal failing, it was a systemic feature of absolute monarchy itself. When you surround someone with courtiers whose survival depends on agreeing with everything they say, when you insulate them from the consequences of their decisions, and when you tell them from birth that they're divinely appointed to rule over others, perhaps it shouldn't surprise us that they occasionally lose touch with the practical world where the rest of us live. The economic illiteracy displayed by these kings would be amusing if it weren't so consistently catastrophic. These kings approached royal finances with a level of sophistication akin to children playing Monopoly with real money, seemingly assuming that kingdoms were equipped with limitless credit cards and that bankruptcy was a phenomenon exclusive to their subjects. Their collective fiscal policies could serve as a masterclass in how to transform prosperous realms into economic basket cases through sheer determination and creative accounting. Yet their failures weren't entirely without benefit to human civilization. Each spectacular royal meltdown contributed to the gradual evolution of constitutional government, proving through negative example that perhaps concentrating all power in a single person wasn't the most reliable system of governance. Magna Carta emerged from John's tyranny, the English Civil War produced modern parliamentary democracy, and the French Revolution launched the age of popular sovereignty. These kings didn't intend to advance human freedom, but their incompetence accomplished what generations of political philosophers had only dreamed about. Their military disasters followed similar patterns of overconfidence meeting reality with predictably painful results. Each king seemed to believe that royal blood somehow conferred tactical genius, that loyalty could substitute for competence, and that divine favour was more reliable than adequate logistics. Their battlefields became laboratories for testing whether wishful thinking could overcome superior strategy, and the results were remarkably consistent across centuries and cultures. The personal lives of these rulers revealed another consistent theme: the inability to distinguish between loyalty and fear, between respect and subservience, between love and intimidation. Their courts became theatres of performed devotion, where genuine relationships withered under the pressure of absolute power and existential insecurity. It's rather telling that so many died alone, abandoned by subjects who had spent years pretending to adore them. Perhaps most notably, these kings managed to fail upward for remarkable lengths of time, maintaining power long after their incompetence had become obvious to everyone except themselves. The ability of medieval institutions to withstand years or even decades of catastrophically poor leadership is testament to their resilience. Yet even the most durable systems eventually reach their limits. Their collective legacy reminds us that leadership is a skill, not a birthright, that power without accountability inevitably corrupts, and that sometimes the most important service a ruler can provide is serving as a cautionary tale for future generations. These kings didn't set out to become historical laughingstocks, but they approached their responsibilities with such consistent incompetence that failure became their most lasting contribution to human knowledge. In our modern age of democratic government and constitutional limitations, these royal disasters serve as reminders of why we developed checks and balances, term limits, and the radical idea that perhaps leaders should be chosen for their competence rather than their heredity. They prove that while power may corrupt, absolute power corrupts with remarkable efficiency and often spectacular entertainment value. The worst kings in history ultimately taught us that the divine right of kings is only as strong as the earthly competence of the person wearing the crown, and that sometimes the best thing an absolute monarch can do for their subjects is provide them with compelling reasons to abolish absolute monarchy entirely. Their failures became humanity's gain, though it took centuries and countless lives to learn these lessons. Perhaps that's the ultimate irony of their reigns. In trying to establish their greatness, they established instead the greatness of the systems that replaced them. Quite frankly, the worst kings in history posed a significant challenge. Tonight you witnessed the most dreadful job interviews in human history, where individuals who could barely manage a game of checkers, let alone a kingdom, were granted crowns. You saw kings who taxed the patience of their people, kings who reigned over disaster and sometimes caused it, and kings who couldn't even spell rule without their advisors. History can be cruel, but it certainly has a sense of humour, especially when a crown lands on the wrong head. If you're still awake, don't worry, no one is coming to crown you king tonight. You're safe here, no tyrants are in sight. We have some other cool stories, old and new, to lull you to sleep if you desire. Now I'll let the royal disasters of the past fade into the quiet while I sit by the fire, sipping something less potent than a poisoned chalice. Sleep well, my friend, and as always, sweet dreams and good night. The first voice came not with thunderous clarity, but as a whisper easily mistaken for wind through the garden. I was 13, gathering herbs behind my father Jacques d'Arc's house in Domremy. Most people remember me describing the voice as appearing with blinding light at noon, but the truth differs. It was actually dusk, the hour when shadows transform into something else entirely. Jahan, it said, my name in the old tongue. It was familiar, not commanding nor frightening, like someone who had known me before I knew myself. I dropped my basket, herbs scattering across soil, still warm from the day's sun. No one had prepared me for this moment, even though our priest, Father Verfronte, frequently spoke about saints and visions. People imagine I was overcome with religious ecstasy, but my initial reaction was irritation. I had chores to finish before dark, and Mother would scold me for dallying. Only when the voice came again, 3 days later while I tended our sheep, did I begin to understand. It was Michael, the archangel, though he did not announce himself grandly. He simply began speaking as if he were continuing a long-established conversation. Our village existed in perpetual anxiety. The English and Burgundians raided regularly, forcing us to flee with our livestock to the nearby fortified island of Vaucouleurs. My father served as a village official, Dean they called him, and I watched how the weight of protecting others bent his shoulders. When he returned from burying neighbours killed in raids, he'd sit silently by our hearth, staring at nothing. This was the inheritance of every child in Lorraine, the knowledge that safety was temporary, violence inevitable. The voices, Catherine and Margaret joined Michael eventually, did not immediately speak of saving France. They spoke of me, how I must remain pure, how I must listen carefully. People think I was a simple girl, but simplicity was impossible in our old border region, where language, loyalty and custom blurred. We spoke a dialect that was neither purely French nor German. We pledged allegiance to lords whose names changed with the seasons. You will recognise the Dauphin, they told me once, though I had never travelled beyond our valley and had never seen nobility save for occasional passing knights. How? I inquired, my ignorance weighing heavily on my mind. You will know, was all they answered. Mother taught me to sew and spin, not knowing these domestic skills would later serve me well in army camps. Father taught me to manage our few acres and to recognise when rain threatened the hay harvest. These mundane lessons proved as crucial as anything the voices imparted. I hid the voices from everyone, especially my dear friend Orviette. We gathered flowers for the church altar together, gossiped about village boys, and waded in the Meuse River during summer's heat. Normalcy became my disguise. When my mother spoke of arranging a marriage with the son of a nearby farmer, I neither agreed nor objected, though the voices had already commanded my virginity be preserved. I simply continued spinning wool, kneading bread, and appearing unchanged while something profound transformed within me. The summer I turned 16, English forces pushed deeper into our region. I watched refugees stream through Domremy, women carrying whatever possessions they could save, men with haunted eyes, and children too exhausted to cry. They brought stories of villages burned, of harvests destroyed, and of casual cruelties inflicted by mercenary soldiers who fought for coin rather than cause. One night while our family sheltered in the church during a raid, I watched a woman rock her dead infant, refusing to acknowledge the child had stopped breathing hours before. Something hardened in me then, a resolve that matched the voice's growing urgency. It is time, Michael told me as autumn leaves fell, as France bleeds, the king's son hides while the kingdom crumbles. I am a girl who cannot read, I answered. I've never held a sword. Yet you will lead armies, Catherine replied. I laughed aloud at this absurdity, earning a questioning look from my brother Pierre as we gathered kindling in the forest. You were chosen before birth, Margaret added, not for your knowledge, but for your heart. As winter approached, Burgundian soldiers burned part of our village. I helped neighbours salvage what remained of their homes by digging through ash for cooking pots and for anything usable. The voices grew more insistent, speaking not just in quiet moments, but during daily tasks, during mass, and during rare moments of village celebration. Go to Vaucouleurs, they commanded. Speak to Robert de Baudricourt, I knew the name, the garrison commander, a gruff soldier loyal to the uncrowned Dauphin. What I didn't know was how a peasant girl might gain his audience, how I might convince him of the divine messages only I could hear. But the voices left no room for doubt. I would go, I would speak, I would begin this impossible journey. So I plaited my hair one final time before cutting it away, trading a daughter's life for something without precedent. My cousin Durand Lassois thought I was insane when I asked him to escort me to Vaucouleurs. A practical man with calloused hands and a perpetual furrow between his brows nonetheless agreed, perhaps out of curiosity about what had transformed his once quiet cousin into someone who spoke with unnerving certainty. 3 times you will knock on the captain's door, Catherine had told me. Twice he will refuse you. The 3rd time he will listen. During the January journey to Vaucouleurs, my feet became numb from wearing worn leather shoes. Frost glazed the bare trees like spun sugar, beautiful and bitter. I'd never travelled so far from home, a mere 20 miles that stretched like a pilgrimage. Durand filled silences with nervous chatter about his vineyard and about village gossip, carefully avoiding questions about my purpose until we crested the final hill. What exactly will you say to him? He finally asked as Vaucouleurs' stone walls came into view. The truth seemed both too simple and too extraordinary. Voices from heaven commanded me to seek an audience with the garrison commander, so that I could eventually lead the Dauphin to his coronation at Reims. Instead, I said only, "What God wishes me to say." Baudricourt's guards snickered at the sight of me, a peasant girl in a homespun dress requesting an audience with their commander. But something in my demeanour made them hesitate to simply turn me away. Perhaps it was the way I stood, as if inhabited by something larger than myself. They brought Baudricourt to the courtyard rather than admitting me to his quarters, a public humiliation intended to discourage further persistence. "The Heavenly Lord has messages concerning the welfare of France," I announced, borrowing formality I'd never needed in Domremy. Baudricourt, bearded, broad-shouldered, perpetually armoured even in peacetime, laughed. Not cruelly, but with the weariness of a man besieged by people claiming special knowledge in desperate times. "Return to your father, child," he said. "Learn to improve your thread-spinning skills instead of telling stories." I did not argue. The voices had prepared me for rejection. Durand looked relieved as we left, believing the matter concluded, but I remained in Vaucouleurs, staying with distant relatives, the kindly wheelwright Henri and his wife Catherine Leroyer, who took me in despite their confusion about my purpose. Daily I attended Mass at the Chapel of Sainte Marie, kneeling on stone floors that bruised my knees. Townspeople began noticing the strange girl who prayed with unusual intensity. Some mocked me. Others, sensing something beyond ordinary faith, began asking for blessings, for prayers specific to their troubles. "I have no power to bless," I told a woman who brought her feverish child. "I am only a messenger." Yet I placed my hands on the child's forehead, feeling heat radiating through papery skin, and prayed anyway. When the fever broke 3 days later, whispers about me changed tenor. I was back at Baudricourt's door 6 days after my initial rejection. This time he received me properly in his chambers, curious about rumours circulating through his town. I stood before his massive oak desk, my shadow small against the stone wall behind me. "You claim heaven speaks to you," he said, not bothering with a greeting. "Not claims, truth." The steadiness in my voice surprised even me. "Today, near Orléans, our forces have suffered defeat. A skirmish near a place called Rouvray. The ambush targeted men carrying Lenten fish and provisions for the besieged. You will receive confirmation of the situation in days." I had not known these words would come from my mouth until they emerged. The voices had whispered to them moments before I was to enter his chamber. Baudricourt's expression changed from scepticism to guarded caution. "If the story proves true," he began. "When it proves true," I corrected, "you will provide me an escort to Chinon." He dismissed me without commitment. Messengers confirmed the Battle of the Herrings 4 days later. While my prediction was not particularly detailed, its verification startled Baudricourt into taking me seriously. On my 3rd visit, he listened fully. "I must dress as a man," I explained. "The journey is dangerous, and I have been promised protection if I maintain my virtue." What I didn't say is that the voices sometimes revealed to me glimpses of what awaited. Roads crawling with Burgundian patrols, English archers in forest clearings, and rivers swollen with winter melt. A woman travelling would face dangers beyond enemy soldiers. The voices promised safety but required prudence. Baudricourt commissioned male clothing for me, a dark woolen tunic, leggings, and a boots that needed stuffing at the toes. Baudricourt cut my hair even shorter, cropping it close to my scalp. When I dressed in these garments for the first time, the Le Royer watched with troubled fascination. Henri crossed himself. Catherine wiped tears. "You look," Henri started, unable to find appropriate words. "Like God's instrument," I finished for him, though I felt only like myself, simply clad differently. Jean de Metz and Bertrand de Poulengy, two of Baudricourt's men, volunteered to accompany me to Chinon. Both later claimed divine inspiration moved them to offer an escort, but I saw more earthly calculation in their eyes, curiosity about whether the strange girl might truly have heavenly favour, whether their fortunes might rise by proximity. The night before departure, Baudricourt summoned me once more. The chamber's single candle cast dramatic shadows across his face, deepening already severe features. "If you are deceiving us, if you lead my men into danger through false prophecy—" He let the threat hang unfinished. "I move only as directed," I answered. "Your men's safety is precious to heaven." He handed me a sword then, not ceremoniously, but with a practicality that acknowledged the dangers ahead. "Can you use this?" I had never held a sword before. Its weight surprised me, the pommel cool against my palm. "I will not need to," I said. "Others will fight. I carry the standard." This answer, so specific yet so odd, seemed to finally convince him. He nodded once, reclaimed the sword, and uttered words that would become famous, despite their lack of theatrical flair in their actual delivery. "Go then, and let come what comes." The following morning, February 23rd, I departed Vaucouleurs with my small escort. Townspeople gathered to watch, some touching my garments as if I were already a saint. A woman pressed a rosary into my hand. A blacksmith crossed himself as I passed. I did not look back at the town's gate, even though homesickness was already pulling at me, not for Domremy, but for a simplicity that I had now irrevocably lost. Ahead lay 11 days of hard travel through enemy territory, and beyond that challenges I could scarcely imagine. But Michael's voice accompanied me, steady as my heartbeat. "France's liberation begins with each step you take." The journey to Chinon tested faith more than physical endurance. We travelled mainly at night, avoiding main roads where English and Burgundian patrols sought travellers to rob or ransom. During daylight hours, we hid in abandoned shepherds' huts or dense woodland. Jean de Metz and Poulengy initially insisted I sleep separate from them to protect my virtue, but practicality soon dissolved such courtesies. We huddled together for warmth in February's biting cold, my male attire and their honour providing sufficient barriers. My companions' attitudes toward me evolved during our journey. Initial scepticism transformed into cautious reverence after we narrowly avoided a Burgundian patrol that should have intercepted us. "The wind shifted," Poulengy remarked, not connecting the sudden weather change to my silent prayer moments before. Later, when we reached a swollen river that maps showed no crossing for miles, a local boy appeared as if conjured, guiding us to a hidden ford. My escorts exchanged meaningful glances, but I knew these were not miracles, merely the everyday workings of divine guidance. "Will you truly recognise the Dauphin?" Jean asked one evening, as we warmed our hands over a small, carefully shielded fire. "They say he often hides among his courtiers to test visitors." "God will identify his anointed," I answered, though privately I wondered how this recognition would manifest. Voices remained frustratingly vague on practical details. We reached Chinon on March 6th, but 2 more days passed before gaining entrance to the castle. We lodged in the town below, where I endured the first of many examinations by church officials Boursin sent to determine whether my claims were divine inspiration, demonic influence, or simple madness. "How can we know God speaks through you?" demanded an elderly priest with yellowed fingers and breath sour from fasting. "By the signs that follow," I replied, remembering Catherine's coaching. "God does not ask for blind faith, but provides confirmation for those who truly seek. What signs have you performed?" "None yet. Signs are not tricks of the conjurer, performed on demand. They unfold as needed." He seemed satisfied with this answer, which surprised me. Later I learned he reported favourably on my orthodoxy, noting, "I answered questions about faith with simple clarity, rather than elaborate theological constructions that might suggest educated heretical influences." When I eventually gained entry to the castle, I faced a planned challenge. Charles, not yet crowned and increasingly doubtful of his legitimacy, had arranged for another man to sit on the throne while he stood among dozens of richly dressed courtiers. The great hall blazed with hundreds of candles, their light reflecting off jewelled fingers and golden threads woven through noble garments. The assembled court watched expectantly, many smirking at the prospect of a peasant girl's confusion. I had never seen such finery, such concentrated wealth. For a moment my confidence wavered. These were people whose everyday garments cost more than my family earned in years. What arrogance brought me here? Then Margaret whispered, not in my ear, but directly within my mind, "Remember your purpose. You are not sent to be dazzled by earthly riches." Without hesitation, I walked directly through the crowd toward a plainly dressed man standing among the courtiers. Kneeling before him, I said what the voices prompted. "God gives you life and glory, gentle Dauphin." Charles's face registered shock, quickly controlled. "I am not the king," he protested, maintaining the charade. "I did not call you king," I answered. "You are the Dauphin, but you will be king when properly consecrated at Reims, as is God's will." The court murmured. Charles gestured for seclusion, guiding me to a window ledge where we could converse discreetly. "If you truly come from God," he said quietly, "tell me something only divine knowledge could reveal." I repeated words Michael had given me during our journey. "You made a private prayer at All Saints last November, asking God for confirmation of your right to the throne, questioning whether your mother's reputation spoke truth about your birth. God answers now. You are the legitimate heir to France. Your suffering is seen, your doubts are understood, but you must claim what heaven has preserved for you." Charles paled visibly. He later confirmed that he had prayed this prayer in solitude, that I knew its contents convinced him when nothing else might have. Yet despite this private conviction, Charles remained publicly cautious. I was subjected to further examinations, including 3 weeks of questioning by theologians at Poitiers who probed for heretical beliefs or signs of demonic influence. They examined my body for witches' marks, questioned my insistence on male attire, and tested my knowledge of Christian doctrine. What history rarely records is the humiliation of these examinations and the indignity of learned men debating whether my virginity indicated divine protection or simply a lack of opportunity, as well as whether my voices were angels or clever demons. One elderly theologian suggested I might simply suffer from female hysteria due to my unmarried state. "Perhaps," I replied evenly, "but does hysteria typically predict military outcomes or recognize disguised kings?" During these weeks of examination I grew increasingly frustrated by delays. Orléans remained under siege, its situation deteriorating. The voices became more urgent, sometimes waking me from sleep with commands to move quickly. "Time slips away," Michael warned. "France's heart weakens with each passing day." I petitioned Charles repeatedly for action, facing resistance from his advisor Georges de la Trémoille, who viewed me as a threat to his influence. "The maid makes bold claims," he told Charles within my hearing, "yet prophecies are cheap while soldiers' lives are dear." "Prophecies may be cheap," I countered, "but the price of ignorance is the fall of your kingdom." Charles wavered between believing my divine mandate and fearing the consequences of following an unproven visionary. What finally convinced him was pragmatism. All conventional military strategies had failed. His treasury emptied while English territory in France expanded. What harm could come from allowing me to attempt lifting the siege at Orléans? Should I fail, my losses would be minimal compared to the daily losses already incurred. If I succeeded, the reward was incalculable. In late April, after nearly 7 weeks of delay and examination, Charles finally granted me my mission. I was provided armour made to my measurements, lightweight plates that nonetheless felt foreign against my body. The sword given to me was serviceable but ordinary, not the special blade I had described seeing in my visions. "There is a sword meant for me," I explained to Charles, "buried behind the altar at Sainte Catherine de Fierbois. It bears 5 crosses on its blade and has lain there since Charles Martel's time." Charles, still testing the limits of my strange knowledge, sent men to investigate this oddly specific claim. They indeed found an ancient sword buried exactly where described, its existence unknown to the local priests. This sword became my physical token of divine sanction. However, I primarily carried a standard instead of wielding weapons. The standard was my design, a white field adorned with fleur-de-lis, bearing the names Jesus Maria, and depicting God holding the world with angels at his side. This banner would precede me into battle, a visible reminder that our cause carried heavenly blessing. Before departing Chinon, I dictated a letter to the English commanders surrounding Orléans, warning them to depart France or face divine judgment. The scribe who recorded my words kept glancing up in disbelief as increasingly forceful language flowed from the peasant girl before him. "Surrender to the maid sent by God, the King of Heaven. You will not hold the kingdom of France from God, the King of Heaven, Son of St. Mary, King Charles, the true heir. Will hold it, for God wills it." When read aloud afterward, the words sounded strange to my ears, both mine and not mine, carrying an authority I'd never possessed in Domremy. The courtiers exchanged troubled glances, uncertain whether they witnessed inspired prophecy or dangerous delusion. However, Charles had chosen to support my journey. Charles had gathered equipment and assembled troops. The impossible campaign was about to begin. On the evening before our departure for Orléans, I stood alone on the castle ramparts, watching spring stars emerge. Homesickness washed over me unexpectedly, not for my village specifically, but for anonymity, for the peace of tending sheep on quiet hillsides. "Having doubts?" Catherine asked, her voice gentle within my mind. "No doubts," I answered silently. "It's simply a conscious understanding of what you can't take back." "The path narrows before you," she acknowledged. "But remember why you were chosen, not for skill with sword or strategy, but for perfect faith in God's plan." I nodded, though no human eyes witnessed this private exchange. Perfect faith. It was not blindness to danger nor an absence of fear, but a willingness to proceed despite both. With that understanding, I descended to prepare for departure, ready to transform from examined curiosity to battlefield commander. We departed Tours on April 27th with supplies and reinforcements for the besieged city, but conflict emerged immediately between military commanders and me, a teenage girl claiming divine guidance. The army's veteran captains, Jean de Dunois, La Hire, and Etienne de Vignoles, regarded me with open scepticism. They had weathered years of defeats and developed cautious strategies. Avoid confrontation, preserve remaining forces, and accept that Orléans would eventually fall like other strongholds before it. God did not send me to follow cautious men, I informed them during our first council. Orléans will not fall. We will not merely deliver supplies, we will break the siege entirely. La Hire, a notorious soldier known for creative profanity, stared at me in disbelief. With what? Divine wind to blow the English away? They outnumber us. They have secured their positions. They outnumbered David against Goliath, I replied. Numbers mean nothing against God's will. These exchanges established our working relationship. They planned according to military experience, and I insisted on more aggressive action than conventional wisdom suggested was prudent. The compromise that emerged involved approaching Orléans from an unexpected direction, crossing the Loire rather than confronting the stronger English positions directly. This decision, portrayed in chronicles as my strategic brilliance, actually resulted from practical necessity combined with fortunate timing. Spring rains had made the river higher than usual, limiting crossing points but also focusing English defensive positions. My inspiration to approach from the east simply utilised terrain the English had deemed too difficult to defend heavily. We reached the Loire's southern bank on April 29th, where I dictated another letter to the English commanders, this one delivered by herald directly to their lines. "You men of England who have no right in this kingdom of France, go away into your country in God's name. And if you do not do this, await tidings from the maid, who will come to see you shortly to your very great injury." The English soldiers who heard this message reportedly laughed, asking if the French had grown so desperate they now sent girls to fight their battles. William Glasdale, their commander, sent back a message threatening to burn me as a witch and hang those who followed me as heretics if captured. Fear clenched my stomach upon hearing this, not of burning specifically, but of failure, of leading others to death through misplaced confidence. That night I prayed longer than usual, seeking reassurance from my voices, who had grown somewhat quieter since my departure from Chinon. "The English threaten fire," I whispered to the darkness of my tent. "All human flesh fears flames," Margaret answered compassionately. "But remember, the true fire is God's purpose burning through you. It consumes doubt and illuminates the path." On April 30th, we successfully transported supplies into Orléans via river barges, bringing desperately needed provisions to the city's defenders. I entered that evening during a rainstorm, soaked and physically exhausted but filled with strange exhilaration. Citizens lined the narrow streets despite the weather, reaching to touch my armour or standard as if I carried a tangible blessing. Jacques Bouchy, the city treasurer, offered his home for my lodging. His daughter Charlotte, closest to my age among the household, helped remove my armour that the first evening. She gasped, seeing bruises already forming where metal had pressed against my skin during the long ride. "Does it hurt terribly?" she asked, applying herbal salve to the worst marks. "Less than fear hurts this city," I answered. The truth was, I barely noticed physical discomfort. My focus had narrowed to a single purpose, fulfilling what the voices promised. The following days brought increasing frustration. Military commanders insisted on gradual approaches, small gains, and careful conservation of resources. I demanded immediate, decisive action against key English fortifications. Each war council became a battle itself, me against experienced soldiers who saw my urgency as naivete. On May 4th, while commanders deliberated yet another cautious plan, I napped briefly in the chamber. Within dreamlike moments, Michael appeared with unusual clarity. "They attack the eastern gate," he stated without preamble. "Now!" I woke instantly, calling for my squire to help with armour. Charlotte, who had been mending nearby, looked startled at my sudden urgency. "What happens?" she asked. "Eastern gate," was all I managed, while struggling through my padded undergarment. Fighting has begun. Indeed, while commanders planned, English forces had launched a surprise assault against Saint-Loup, one of the city's eastern fortifications. By the time I reached the area, French defenders were already retreating in disarray. Without waiting for formal orders, I rode directly toward the conflict with the standard raised high. Soldiers later described the events as miraculous, noting how retreating men turned back upon seeing me, and how their broken courage transformed into a determined advance. The reality was less mystical but no less effective. In the confusion of battle, a symbolic focal point, a distinctive figure on horseback with an unmistakable banner, provided a rallying point and renewed purpose. "Who retreats when heaven fights alongside us?" I called, my voice carrying surprisingly well across the din of combat. "Forward! God has delivered them into our hands." The battle turned. By evening, Saint-Loup had fallen to our forces. This victory, while modest in strategic terms, transformed perceptions. Soldiers who had doubted began viewing me with superstitious awe. Commanders who had dismissed my counsel became more willing to listen. Yet challenges to authority continued. On May the 5th, Dunois attempted to exclude me from councils, planning operations without my knowledge. Upon discovering this, I confronted him directly. "Do you believe you can conceal God's battle from his messenger?" I demanded, interrupting their closed meeting. "Why do you plot in shadows when heaven watches regardless?" Dunois, intelligent, politically astute, recognised the changing mood among troops. "We sought only to spare you the technical details," he offered diplomatically. "Spare me nothing," I countered. "I was not sent to be spared, but to lead." The following day, the assault on Saint-Jean-le-Blanc and the Augustin fortress took place. This incident was one of the key events that solidified my reputation among common soldiers. English defenders had positioned archers to cover the main approach. As our forces hesitated under the deadly rain of arrows, I rode forward alone, standards held high. An arrow struck her armour, witnesses later reported, yet she continued as if untouched. In truth, the arrow glanced off my shoulder plate, bruising but not penetrating. More significant than this minor miracle was the psychological effect of my advance. Soldiers, shamed by a girl's courage, surged forward. The fortification fell by evening. May 7th brought the decisive assault against Les Tourelles, the main fortress controlling Orléans' river crossing. Here my legend and reality most dramatically intersect. Historical accounts describe me taking an arrow to the shoulder, having predicted this injury the previous day. The wound was real, an English longbow arrow penetrating between neck and shoulder armour. But my prediction had been more general. Blood will be drawn tomorrow, but not all of it French. The pain nearly caused unconsciousness. I was pulled from battle briefly while the arrow was removed, not ceremoniously as depicted in romantic paintings, but with brutal efficiency by a field surgeon who feared wound fever would set in if the barbed head remained embedded. He poured boiling oil into the wound to cauterize the bleeding, pain that exceeded the original injury. "Wine," I gasped afterward. "Just a little." Instead of wine, they gave me consecrated bread, communion without formal ceremony, battlefield sacrament. The pain receded enough that I could stand again, though using my right arm remained impossible. Military commanders, seeing my condition, ordered a retreat for the day. The assault would resume tomorrow, they decided, without consulting me. I heard this decision while having my wound bandaged. "No," I countermanded, struggling back into partial armour despite Charlotte's protests. "We finish today. The English resolve dwindles with each passing hour. Returning to battle with the wound still fresh became the defining moment witnesses remembered. The injured maid refusing retreat. Standard transferred to my left hand while my right arm hung useless, rallying troops for the final push as daylight began fading. What's rarely recorded is how fever already began clouding my thoughts, how each movement sent waves of nausea through me, and how the voices seemed to speak from an increasingly enormous distance. Yet purpose carried me forward when physical strength should have failed. The English commander Glassdale, who had promised to burn me as a witch, died during this final assault when a makeshift bridge collapsed beneath him. He drowned in the Loire, weighed down by the very armour meant to protect him. Soldiers on both sides viewed his death as divine judgment, superstitious fear spreading through remaining English forces. By nightfall, Les Tourelles had fallen. The siege that had strangled Orléans for 7 months broke in just 4 days of concerted action. The following morning, May 8th, remaining English troops retreated from positions they'd held since October, abandoning equipment and supplies in their haste. Orléans erupted in celebration. Church bells rang continuously. Citizens who had expected either starvation or massacre instead found themselves liberated. They credited the maid, the peasant girl from Domremy who had promised deliverance and, against all rational expectation, delivered it. That night, fevered and weak from blood loss, I struggled to understand what had truly happened. Had God performed miracles through me? Or had my presence simply catalysed human courage that already existed, waiting only for symbol and purpose to crystallise action? "Both," Catherine whispered, as I drifted between consciousness and dream. "The greatest miracles work through natural channels, not to pipe them." Citizens began calling me La Pucelle d'Orléans, the Maid of Orléans, a title that would follow me through history. Yet alone in prayer that night, I remained simply Jeanne, aching, feverish, wondering what further price fulfilling heaven's commands might require. By nightfall, Les Tourelles had fallen. The siege that had strangled Orléans for 7 months broke in just 4 days of concerted action. The following morning, May 8th, remaining English troops retreated from positions they'd held since October, abandoning equipment and supplies in their haste. Orléans erupted in celebration. Church bells rang continuously. Citizens who had expected either starvation or massacre instead found themselves liberated. They credited the maid, the peasant girl from Domremy who had promised deliverance and, against all rational expectation, delivered it. That night, fevered and weak from blood loss, I struggled to understand what had truly happened. Had God performed miracles through me? Or had my presence simply catalysed human courage that already existed, waiting only for symbol and purpose to crystallise action? "Both," Catherine whispered, as I drifted between consciousness and dream. "The greatest miracles work through natural channels, not to pipe them." Citizens began calling me La Pucelle d'Orléans, the Maid of Orléans, a title that would follow me through history. Yet alone in prayer that night, I remained simply Jeanne, aching, feverish, wondering what further price fulfilling heaven's commands might require. Throughout this journey, I maintained my male attire and slept fully armoured most nights, surrounded by guards. This practice, later used as evidence of impropriety during my trial, served practical purposes beyond the voice's commands. Travelling with thousands of soldiers while identifiably female invited dangers obvious to any woman, divine protection notwithstanding. The armour provided a physical barrier against casual assault. Male clothing minimised unwanted attention during necessary activities. We reached Reims on July 16th. The city welcomed Charles without resistance, its citizens lining streets to witness what many had thought impossible months earlier. I wrote to Philip of Burgundy that same day, urging reconciliation with Charles, calling on him to make good peace that will last with the rightful king. This letter received no immediate response but represented my growing political involvement beyond battlefield leadership. The coronation ceremony on July the 17th exists in popular imagination as a triumphant culmination, the maid standing proudly beside her king as divine prophecy is fulfilled. Reality contained more nuance. I indeed stood near the altar holding my standard, but experienced the ceremony with complicated emotions. Initially, relief predominated. I had accomplished the primary mission the voices had given me. Charles knelt before the Archbishop, received sacred anointing from the Holy Ampulla, and rose as King Charles VII, his legitimacy no longer questionable. As the Archbishop placed the crown on his head, I spontaneously broke into tears. "Now God's work is accomplished," I told him afterward, during the celebration feast where I was granted a position of honour. "You are the true King of France by holy coronation as well as by birth." Charles, emotionally moved despite his typically reserved nature, asked what reward I desired for my service. Courtiers leaned forward, anticipating requests for titles, lands and wealth, the normal currency of royal gratitude. "Grant tax exemption to Domremy," I requested instead. "My people are poor and have suffered much from the war's passage." This modest request enhanced my reputation for saintly disinterest in worldly gain, as it cost the crown almost nothing and showed my lack of personal ambition. The voices never promised a personal reward for completing heaven's tasks. My future remained conspicuously absent from their pronouncements. That evening, alone in chambers provided within the Archbishop's palace, I experienced something unprecedented: silence from the voices that had guided me since age 13. I prayed for hours, seeking their familiar presence, but encountered only ordinary stillness. "Have I failed in some manner?" I finally asked aloud, desperate for a response. Catherine's voice, when it finally came, sounded distant, as if speaking across enormous separation. "The path divides before you. One direction leads to earthly glory but spiritual peril. The other is bodily suffering but heavenly triumph." Which should I choose? I begged, but received no answer. The voice's diminishing clarity troubled me deeply as we departed Reims on July 20th. For years they had provided unmistakable direction. Now, at the moment of greatest public acclaim, their guidance grew ambiguous precisely when political complexity demanded the clearest understanding. Charles and his advisors favoured consolidating recent gains, negotiating with Burgundy and avoiding confrontation with primary English forces. I advocated for an immediate advance on Paris, aiming to strike while our momentum remained strong and English authority appeared weakest. These divergent strategies reflected fundamental differences in perspective. Charles thinking in political terms of alliances and sustainable power, and me still operating from a divine mandate to drive foreign forces from France entirely. God did not deliver victory at Orleans so you could stop halfway to complete liberation, I argued during councils. Paris is the kingdom's heart, reclaim it and the English position collapses. What I couldn't share was my growing fear that time was running out, and that the fading of the voices signalled an impending end to divine favour. This created urgency I couldn't fully explain to military commanders accustomed to deliberate campaigns. As we travelled through recently liberated territories, common people flocked to see me, reaching to touch my armour, begging blessings for children, and offering tokens of appreciation. Women wept openly, seeing in me something that transcended conventional limitations placed on our gender. Men removed caps respectfully, as if in the presence of something holy. This veneration discomforted me increasingly. "I am not a saint," I told Charlotte d'Albret, a noblewoman who had joined our travelling court and attempted to collect my discarded garments as relics. "I am only God's messenger, nothing in myself." "Yet God chose you," she countered. "That distinction itself makes you extraordinary." This growing cult of personality served immediate political purposes, rallying support for Charles, demonstrating divine favour for his rule, but created complications I was ill-equipped to navigate. Each miraculous attribution, each story embellished in retelling, placed me further from the simple girl who had left Domremy, believing heaven's instructions were straightforward. By late July, Charles had begun secret negotiations with Burgundy, seeking diplomatic resolution while publicly maintaining military pressure. This strategy made political sense, but contradicted the voice's increasingly sporadic instructions for complete liberation through direct action. The resulting tension manifested in council debates, where my previously decisive guidance now competed with experienced political advisors offering conventional alternatives. "You were not sent to negotiate half measures," Michael told me during rare communication. "We must fully cleanse France of foreign presence." Yet when I repeated such sentiments to Charles and his councillors, they increasingly regarded them as militarily unrealistic and politically naive. The Maid had served her purpose in delivering coronation. Now practical governance required compromises Heaven seemed unwilling to acknowledge. This divergence would soon lead to Paris, and decisions that would alter my path irrevocably. August found us advancing incrementally toward Paris while Charles simultaneously pursued negotiations with Burgundy. This contradictory approach, military pressure paired up with diplomatic outreach, created strategic confusion. Were we truly attempting to recapture Paris, or merely demonstrating military capability to strengthen Charles's negotiating position? The Duke of Bedford, English regent for their child King Henry VI, recognised our momentum and retreated from direct confrontation, reinforcing Paris while yielding smaller surrounding territories. On August 14th, Charles signed a 15-day truce with Burgundy, supposedly creating space for peace negotiations, while actually providing English forces critical time to strengthen Paris's defences. I opposed this truce vehemently, sensing opportunities slipping away. "While you exchange pleasant messages, our enemies rebuild walls and restore courage," I warned Charles. "The moment for decisive action passes with each day of delay." The voices, though less frequent, reinforced this urgency. "Paris must not remain in enemy hands," Margaret insisted during prayer. "The city's liberation will break English resolve completely." Charles wavered between my continued insistence on divine mandate and his councillor's emphasis on political reality. The compromise that emerged satisfied no one. Our forces would advance to Paris's outskirts but avoid full assault while negotiations continued. By late August, we established positions at Saint-Denis, within sight of Paris's northern walls. The city's proximity affected me strangely. After months of campaigning focused on this objective, actually seeing its towers and spires created an almost physical yearning to complete what the voices had promised. Daily, I rode reconnaissance along positions facing the city, studying defences, planning approaches, and praying for clear instruction that came with decreasing reliability. The truce with Burgundy expired without meaningful agreement. On September 8th, I convinced our commanders to attempt an assault against Paris's defences near the Saint-Honoré Gate, despite Charles withholding full support for the operation. This partial commitment meant attacking with insufficient forces against prepared positions, a military mistake justified only by my increasingly desperate insistence that Heaven would provide necessary advantage. "God will blind their gunners," I promised troops assembled for the assault. "Divine protection covers us as we reclaim the kingdom's heart." The attack commenced at noon. Initial progress seemed to confirm divine favour. We reached the outer moat with minimal casualties and established positions within bow range of the walls. I led a contingent testing depth at the inner moat, seeking crossing points while carrying my standard forward as visible inspiration. Then reality asserted itself brutally. Paris's defenders had prepared thoroughly during the negotiation delays. Cannon and crossbow fire rained down upon exposed positions. The moat proved deeper than expected, its bottom studded with sharpened stakes invisible beneath muddy water. Men died attempting crossings that proved impossible without proper equipment we lacked. Near dusk, a crossbow bolt struck my thigh, penetrating deeply. Unlike the Orleans injury, this wound immediately incapacitated me. I continued shouting encouragement from where I fell, insisting the attack continue despite my condition. But commanders ordered retreat upon seeing the standard-bearer down. Soldiers carried me from the battlefield as darkness fell, our forces withdrawing in frustration rather than defeat. We had never established positions from which victory was possible. The wound itself, while painful, would heal cleanly. The spiritual injury proved more significant. For the first time I had promised divine intervention that failed to materialise. "Why?" I whispered that night while surgeons extracted the bolt using methodical cruelty necessary to prevent festering. Why was Paris denied to us when Orleans was granted? The voices remained silent through hours of pain. Their absence felt more painful than physical harm. Had they abandoned me due to some failure? Had I misunderstood Heaven's intent all along? Charles, receiving news of the failed assault, ordered immediate withdrawal from Paris's vicinity. In my view, this sensible military decision represented a personal betrayal as it abandoned divine purpose in favour of political convenience. When I was finally permitted an audience 3 days later, I found that he was already reframing recent events for the courtiers. The maid accomplished what God sent her to do, he explained smoothly. Orléans liberated, coronation achieved. Perhaps heaven never intended Paris's immediate recovery. You speak for heaven now, I challenged him, struggling to stand straight despite the pain in my bandaged leg. The mission remains incomplete while Englishmen occupy French soil. Charles regarded me with a complex emotion. Gratitude for past service tempered by growing political inconvenience of my unyielding position. France's restoration will require years, not months, he said gently. Even heaven must recognise earthly limitations. This exchange marked a fundamental shift in our relationship. Where Charles had once needed my perceived divine sanction to legitimise his rule, successful coronation now provided independent authority. The maid remained useful symbolically, but increasingly problematic practically, as military campaigns transitioned toward diplomatic solutions requiring compromise and voices prohibited. Through autumn, I accompanied the royal court as it withdrew to safer territories along the Loire. My wound healed gradually while my position diminished subtly. Still honoured ceremonially, but increasingly excluded from meaningful councils. Charles granted me noble status in December, providing arms depicting a sword supporting the crown beneath a fleur-de-lis, recognition that pacified my supporters while effectively sidelining me from direct military command. This period marked my most difficult spiritual challenge. The voices returned intermittently, but spoke with disturbing inconsistency. Michael demanded continued aggressive action, while Catherine counselled patience. Margaret sometimes suggested accepting a ceremonial role within Charles's court, but she also insisted that my work remained unfinished. These contradictions created profound doubt I had never experienced during the clarity of earlier missions. Had some of the voices I heard been false all along? Was I now mishearing divine instruction? Or was heaven itself divided on France's proper path forward? Christmas 1429 found me in ceremonial attendance at court celebrations, outwardly honoured but inwardly conflicted. I watched an elaborate pageantry commemorating Charles's coronation, performances that already incorporated stylized depictions of the maid as a semi-mythical figure guiding France's resurgence. The actual Johanne, still bandaged, increasingly isolated, observed her transformation into a symbol with growing discomfort. That night, kneeling alone in the castle chapel long after formal services concluded, I experienced the voices with unusual clarity after months of ambiguity. "Your time grows short," Michael stated without preamble. "You must continue the fight while freedom remains yours." "The king no longer heeds my counsel," I protested. "Commanders follow his direction, not mine." "Then you must act independently, Miro," came the reply. "Better capture by enemies than surrender to comfortable irrelevance." Although troubling, this guidance offered direction that I had been lacking for months. As 1429 ended, I resolved to escape the increasingly gilded constraints of court life and return to direct action, even without royal sanction. This decision, tactically questionable, politically naive, would determine my fate in ways the voices never clearly revealed. The new year began with me effectively sidelined at court while Charles pursued diplomatic arrangements with Burgundy. I chafed at inactivity, sensing precious time wasting, while the voices grew increasingly urgent about continuing France's liberation. By March 1430, I could bear ceremonial confinement no longer. Without royal permission, technically desertion, though my status remained ambiguous, I departed secretly with a small company of loyal followers. We rode for Compiègne, a strategically vital town threatened by the Burgundian forces north of Paris. This decision reflected both military logic and the voices' insistence that action could not await royal convenience. My departure created political complications for Charles, who neither officially condemned nor endorsed my independent operation. This ambiguity proved ultimately fatal. Had I remained clearly under royal protection, subsequent events might have unfolded differently. We reached Compiègne in April, where the town's governor, Guillaume de Flavy, welcomed reinforcement despite its unofficial nature. Burgundian forces under Jean de Luxembourg had been methodically isolating the town, capturing surrounding positions. Our arrival boosted defender morale temporarily, but the strategic situation remained precarious. On May the 23rd, I led a sortie against Burgundian positions at Margny, initially achieving surprise. However, enemy reinforcements arrived quickly, forcing retirement toward the town. As our forces retreated across the single bridge into Compiègne, disaster struck. The drawbridge raised prematurely, stranding rear guard defenders, including my Sèvres, outside the walls. Accounts of this moment vary dramatically. Some claim deliberate betrayal by Flavy, who supposedly ordered early closure knowing I would be captured. Others suggested simple miscommunication during confused withdrawal. The voices had warned of betrayal for months. Trust only heaven, not changeable men, Michael had cautioned repeatedly, but provided no specific protection against this development. Burgundian soldiers surrounded me, and after a brief battle, they pulled me from my horse. A minor nobleman, Lionel of Wandonne, claimed my surrender, technically capturing me by laying hand on my leg, according to contemporary accounts. My sword, raised to continue resistance, lowered upon recognition that futile struggle would only result in unnecessary deaths among my few remaining companions. I am worth more alive for ransom than dead, I told Wandonne in a practical manner, even though I knew that the ransom would likely never materialise. The voices had never specifically predicted capture, but had indicated great suffering lay ahead as part of Heaven's plan. Initially, captivity seemed relatively benign. Luxembourg treated me as a valuable prisoner rather than a criminal, housing me reasonably at his castle at Beaulieu. I made one escape attempt, nearly succeeding by squeezing between wooden bars, before being recaptured and transferred to more secure confinement at Beaurevoir Castle. There, Luxembourg's Aunt Jeanne and wife Jeanne Bonne treated me with unexpected kindness, providing female clothing and gentle encouragement to abandon male attire and military aspirations. Their compassion, the first feminine companionship I'd experienced since leaving Domremy, tempted me toward compromise I knew the voices would forbid. Why must I maintain a male appearance now that fighting has ended? I asked during prayer, receiving Catherine's uncompromising response. Your mission hasn't changed with capture. Male attire remains both practical protection and a visible sign of a divine exception to worldly constraints. News reached me at Beaurevoir that Compiègne's situation worsened daily. In desperation, I attempted a second escape in October, this time jumping from the tower window approximately 70 feet above ground. The fall should have proved fatal, but I survived with only bruising and temporary unconsciousness was later presented as either a miracle or evidence of demonic protection, depending on the interpreter. By November, political machinations surrounding my captivity clarified horribly. The English, recognising my symbolic value, arranged a purchase from Luxembourg for 10,000 livres, a substantial sum indicating my importance to their strategy. Charles made no counteroffer, effectively abandoning me to the enemy's judgment. The English faced a dilemma regarding my disposition. Simple execution of a captured enemy combatant would risk martyrdom, potentially strengthening French resistance rather than weakening it. A more complex strategy emerged: systematic destruction of my divine claims through ecclesiastical condemnation for heresy. This approach would not only eliminate me physically, but, more importantly, delegitimize everything I represented, divine sanction for Charles's rule, and heaven's support for French resurgence against English occupation. In December 1430, they transferred me to Rouen, firmly within English-controlled territory. Conditions deteriorated immediately. I was placed in secular prison rather than ecclesiastical custody, normally accorded those facing religious charges, confined in iron shackles, and guarded continuously by common soldiers whose behaviour ranged from verbal abuse to attempted assault. Why does heaven permit such treatment? I asked during increasingly desperate prayers. What purpose does this suffering serve? Remember Christ before Pilate, Margaret answered. Truth remains truth, even when power condemns it. The trial officially began February 21st, 1431, under Bishop Pierre Cauchon, whose appointment revealed the proceedings' predetermined nature. He was a known English sympathiser with personal animosity toward me. Assessors and judges were carefully selected to ensure the desired outcome. Although it was technically an ecclesiastical court, the proceedings were entirely controlled by English authorities. Looking back now across time's distance, I see legal complexities I couldn't recognise then. My request for balanced representation from both English and French clerics was denied. My appeal to the Pope, technically my right under church law, was ignored. Most cruelly, highly educated theologians denied me counsel, twisting simple statements into heretical formulations. Do you believe yourself to be in God's grace? Horchon asked early in the proceedings, a theological trap. Answering yes would imply a presumption that is condemned by church doctrine, while answering no would indicate an admission of guilt. If I am not, may God put me there, I replied, after a moment's thought. If I am, may God keep me there. This answer frustrated the interrogators, but I simply expressed my actual understanding, showing unexpected theological sophistication. Grace remained God's province, not mine to claim absolutely. For 5 months, interrogation continued, sometimes publicly before a full tribunal, sometimes in private prison questioning. My male attire became the central focus, providing tangible evidence of defiance against natural order. Voices were dissected endlessly. Were they angels or demons? Why did they speak to an uneducated girl rather than through the established church hierarchy? I recorded and examined each of my answers for inconsistencies and potential heresies. What records don't capture the physical deterioration during this period? Prison conditions, continuous shackling, poor nutrition, sleep interrupted by guards' harassment, gradually weakened a body already compromised by previous wounds and hardship. By May, I suffered recurring fevers, dramatic weight loss, and periods of confusion during longer interrogations. The voices remained present but changed character. Less commanding, more comforting. They spoke increasingly of heavenly reward rather than earthly victory, preparing me for an outcome that seemed increasingly inevitable. Will I burn? I asked directly during one night's prayer. The body is temporary, Catherine answered gently. What matters is truth maintained until the end. On May the 24th, I was taken to the Rouen cemetery, where scaffolds had been erected, one holding officials who would witness my anticipated recantation, another displaying instruments of execution should I refuse. Exhausted physically and isolated completely, I briefly wavered when presented with a document I was told contained a simple abjuration of male clothing and independent interpretation of voices. What I was unaware of was that the actual document contained a comprehensive admission of fraud, demonic influence, and heretical intent, completely repudiating everything I had experienced and represented. Unable to read, I trusted partial translations provided by clerics, whose deceptions served their predetermined purpose. I signed with a simple crossmark, unaware that I was giving my enemies exactly what they needed, an apparent admission that everything I had claimed about divine guidance was false. This temporary weakness, a product of extreme duress rather than a genuine change of heart, provided legal justification for what followed. Returned to prison rather than transferred to ecclesiastical custody as promised, I found myself still surrounded by hostile guards, still denied female companionship that would have made feminine clothing practically sustainable. When my clothes were taken while I slept and only male attire was left available, I faced an impossible choice: remain naked among male guards or don forbidden garments. The voices spoke with unusual clarity that morning. Better modest impropriety than immodest vulnerability. I dressed in male clothing, knowing this relapse provided the final justification enemies sought. When judges returned to document this transgression, I formally recanted my previous abjuration, stating clearly that voices were indeed divine, that the mission had been heaven-sent, and that temporary weakness had betrayed truth. I would rather do penance once, with death, than bear imprisonment suffering continuously, I told them with renewed clarity, despite knowing the consequence. On May the 30th, 1431, the final sentence was announced. Declared a relapsed heretic, I would face public execution by burning, the most painful death authorities could legally impose, deliberately chosen to create maximum suffering they hoped would produce a final public confession. That morning I made a final confession to a sympathetic priest and received communion despite being formally excommunicated, a small act of compassionate defiance by a cleric who recognised injustice unfolding. Wearing the traditional long white garment for heresy executions, a cart transported me through Rouen's streets toward the old marketplace, where execution awaited. The crowd's mood surprised me, not triumphant, but sombre, many openly weeping. These were not my French compatriots, but Norman subjects under English rule, yet something about my situation transcended political loyalty. Later accounts would claim English authorities grew concerned that sympathy might transform into riots, and that martyrdom was being created despite their careful legal manoeuvring. At the execution ground, officials had me a final opportunity to recant before tying me to a tall stake erected atop a substantial pyre. The method was deliberate. Slow death by suffocation and burning rather than quicker execution methods available. Jesus! I called repeatedly as flames were lit, no longer concerned with appearing strong before enemies, simply seeking comfort in the name that had guided my journey from its beginning. The voices spoke one final time as smoke began rising. Your suffering ends today. Your vindication begins. The physical agony that followed transcends description. Historical accounts claim my heart remained intact among ashes afterward, a symbolic detail probably invented by later chroniclers seeking miraculous elements for potential canonization. What mattered wasn't physical preservation, but the truth maintained until the end, that simple faith could withstand elaborate machinations of power, and that divine purpose worked through unlikely instruments. 25 years later, Charles VII, firmly established as France's legitimate king, would order an investigation that formally nullified my conviction, declaring the trial prejudiced and illegitimate. In 1456, a rehabilitation trial formally cleared my name of heresy charges, yet full vindication waited nearly 5 centuries, until May 16, 1920, when the Catholic Church declared me a saint. Official recognition that voices condemned as demonic had indeed been divine. History remembers outcomes: Orléans relieved, Charles crowned, France eventually liberated from the English occupation. These visible victories obscure the internal journey that began with a garden whisper and ended in marketplace flames. The voices never promised earthly reward or personal glory. They offered only purpose, direction, and the chance to serve as an instrument for something larger than myself. They called me Maid of Orléans, dubbed me a miracle worker, labelled me a witch and a heretic, and eventually recognised me as a saint. Yet through all transformations, I remained Johanne from Domremy, a simple girl who answered when voices called, who held to truth heard within more firmly than to comfort offered without. Perhaps that represents the most enduring legacy, that extraordinary purpose may inhabit ordinary lives, that divine participation in human history rarely follows expected channels, but instead works through unlikely vessels willing to say simply, "Here am I, send me." In the year 1162, amidst the sweeping steppes of Mongolia, a child was born into a world of cold winds and endless plains. This child, named Temujin, would grow to become the great Genghis Khan, a name that would echo across history as the founder of the Mongol Empire. But before he became a conqueror, he was simply a boy born into struggle, shaped by the harshness of his environment and the conflicts of his people. The Mongolian steppes stretched far and wide, a vast expanse of grasslands where the sky met the earth in a seamless horizon. Life here was simple yet brutal. Nomadic tribes moved with their herds, living off the land and surviving the harsh winters and the scorching summers. It was a world where strength, loyalty, and resilience were the keys to survival. Temujin's early years were marked by hardship. He was the son of Yesugei, a minor tribal leader, and his wife Holun. When Temujin was just a young boy, his father was poisoned by a rival tribe. This sudden loss left his family vulnerable, and they were abandoned by their own clan. His mother, Holun, took on the responsibility of raising Temujin and his siblings alone. The family was left to fend for themselves on the open steppes, relying on foraging, hunting, and sheer determination to survive. These early struggles forged a deep resilience in Temujin. He learned to endure hunger, cold, and the constant threat of violence. But he also learned the value of unity, the importance of family, and the need for loyalty. His mother's strength became a guiding force in his life. She taught him that survival required not only physical strength, but also wisdom, patience, and an unyielding spirit. As Temujin grew older, he began to understand the fragmented world of the Mongol tribes. There were endless feuds, shifting alliances, and a constant struggle for power. He saw how disunity left his people vulnerable. He dreamed of something greater, of a world where the tribes could be united, where the endless conflicts could be replaced with a shared purpose. But before he could realize this vision, he faced countless challenges. Betrayal was a constant threat. One of his closest friends, Jamuka, who had once sworn brotherhood with him, would later become his rival. Temujin's path was marked by moments of capture, imprisonment, and escape. Each setback hardened his resolve. He believed that strength was found not just in the sword, but in the unity of purpose and loyalty. In time, Temujin began to gather followers who saw his vision. He was not just a warrior. He was a leader who understood people. He rewarded loyalty and merit rather than noble birth, a revolutionary idea in a world bound by tradition. His reputation grew, and more tribes pledged their allegiance to him. His ability to inspire, to strategize, and to adapt set him apart. He was relentless, determined, and focused on a single goal: to unite the Mongol tribes under one banner. In 1206, after years of battles, alliances, and strategic brilliance, Temujin achieved his dream. He was declared Genghis Khan, meaning universal ruler. It was a title that reflected his role as the unifier of the Mongols, a leader who'd brought together the once fractured tribes into a formidable force. But Genghis Khan's vision did not stop at the borders of Mongolia. He saw beyond the steppes, beyond the horizon. His ambition was to create a world where his people could thrive, where the divisions that had weakened them for centuries could be replaced by a new order. His armies, skilled horsemen and fierce warriors, began to expand the Mongol territory. They moved with speed, discipline and precision, conquering lands that had once seemed unreachable. The campaigns of Genghis Khan swept across Central Asia, into China and beyond. His leadership was marked by a combination of ruthless efficiency and strategic genius. He understood the importance of adapting to new challenges, incorporating new technologies, and learning from the cultures he encountered. Under his rule, the Mongol Empire became a melting pot of ideas, trade, and communication. But Genghis Khan was more than just a conqueror. He established laws to bring order to the chaos of his expanding empire. His code, known as the Yasa, emphasized loyalty, discipline, and justice. He promoted religious tolerance, recognizing that unity required respecting the beliefs of diverse peoples. He created systems of communication, trade routes, and infrastructure that connected distant parts of his empire. The Silk Road, once a dangerous route, flourished under Mongol protection, facilitating the exchange of goods, ideas, and cultures. As you breathe in deeply, picture the vast Mongolian steppes under a night sky filled with stars. The grass sways gently in the breeze, and the world is quiet except for the soft sounds of horses and the distant crackle of campfires. Genghis Khan's legacy stretches across these plains, a reminder of a leader who dared to dream of unity, who faced the harshness of his world with an unbreakable spirit. His life was a journey of resilience, vision, and transformation. He turned adversity into strength, chaos into order, and disunity into a vast and enduring empire. Though his methods were fierce, his impact on the world was profound. The connections he forged between East and West reshaped history, leaving a legacy that endures to this day. As you sink deeper into relaxation, let the story of Genghis Khan remind you of the power of perseverance, the strength found in unity, and the importance of vision. His life, filled with challenges and triumphs, speaks to the boundless potential within each of us, the ability to overcome, to lead, and to create lasting change. As you drift even deeper into the calming embrace of sleep, let the echoes of Genghis Khan's journey gently guide your thoughts. His story, one of struggle, vision, and unrelenting determination, is a reminder of the strength that lies within every challenge we face and the boundless potential we possess to shape our own destinies. Picture the endless Mongolian steppes beneath a vast night sky, where the stars shine like scattered diamonds, illuminating the dark plains below. The wind moves softly, whispering tales of ancient conquests and unification, carrying with it the faint scent of grasslands and distant fires. This is the world where Genghis Khan forged his legacy, a world where survival was harsh, but the spirit of resilience was even stronger. As his empire expanded, so too did his influence. His conquests stretched from the mountains of China to the deserts of Persia, from the plains of Russia to the cities of the Middle East. But beyond the battles and the victories, Genghis Khan's mind remained focused on a singular goal: creating a world where his people could thrive. He was not driven purely by conquest, but by the desire to establish order where there was once chaos, to bring unity to lands divided by endless feuds. The Mongol Empire under his leadership was not just vast, but interconnected. Trade routes flourished under his protection, allowing merchants, scholars and travellers to move more freely than ever before. This period of stability and security, often referred to as the Pax Mongolica, allowed ideas, cultures and innovations to flow across continents. Paper, gunpowder and art travelled from east to west, while philosophies, religions and scientific discoveries spread in return. Imagine the caravans moving slowly across the Silk Road, their lanterns glowing softly in the dark, their footsteps measured and steady, the gentle clinking of goods, the murmur of languages blending together. This was a world where once isolated cultures began to connect, creating a tapestry of shared human experience. Genghis Khan's vision of an interconnected world laid the foundation for this exchange, bridging the gaps between civilizations and opening pathways that had once seemed impassable. As you breathe in slowly, picture the vast expanse of his empire, the lands stretching beyond sight. Mountains rise in the distance, rivers carve paths through fertile valleys, and open plains roll endlessly toward the horizon. Each part of this landscape, once divided, is now united under a common rule, a testament to the power of a shared purpose. Genghis Khan's dream of unity has become a reality, one shaped by his unwavering will and strategic brilliance. But even as his empire grew, Genghis Khan remained tied to the simplicity of his roots. He lived a life close to the earth, surrounded by the people who had followed him from the very beginning. He never allowed himself to be consumed by luxury or excess. His strength lay in his ability to understand both the warrior's path and the leader's burden, to balance the ferocity of conquest with the wisdom of governance. As the years passed, Genghis Khan continued to guide his people, his vision extending beyond his own lifetime. He established systems of law and order, ensuring that justice and discipline held his empire together. His code, the Yasa, provided structure and fairness, holding even the highest-ranking leaders accountable. This commitment to order and loyalty became the backbone of the Mongol Empire, a legacy that would endure long after his death. In 1227, Genghis Khan's journey came to an end. He passed away during a military campaign. His body returned to the land he had known since childhood. His burial place remains a mystery, hidden somewhere in the vast steppes, a secret held tightly by those who revered him. But though his physical presence faded, his legacy continued to shape the world. His descendants carried his vision forward, expanding the empire and cementing his place in history. As you breathe deeply, feel the quiet power of Genghis Khan's story resonating within you. His life teaches us that, even in the face of unimaginable challenges, a determined spirit can overcome, a clear vision can unify, and resilience can shape the course of history. He transformed his hardships into strength, his struggles into purpose, and his dreams into reality. Imagine the steppes once more, now calm under the vast night sky. The stars continue their silent watch. The wind carries a sense of timelessness, and the land stretches out in quiet peace. The world rests much like you do now, embracing the stillness that follows the storm, the calm that comes after a journey well travelled. Allow yourself to let go completely, to surrender to this peaceful stillness. The story of Genghis Khan has taken you across endless plains, through battles, struggles, and victories. Now, you rest, knowing that strength, resilience, and vision lie within you, just as they did within him. The journey of discovery, growth, and purpose is yours to continue when you awaken. As you sink deeper into the embrace of sleep, let the echoes of Genghis Khan's legacy ripple through your mind like a soft, steady current. His journey was vast, stretching across endless plains and through the annals of history, yet his life was also a reflection of universal truths: strength in adversity, vision beyond boundaries, and the enduring power of unity. Imagine the stillness of the steppes at dawn, the first light of day casting a golden hue across the endless grasslands. The world holds its breath in quiet anticipation, a moment suspended between night and day. This is the same land that shaped Temujin, the boy who became Genghis Khan. The cold winds, the hardships, the endless horizons, all these elements forged his spirit, teaching him to endure, to adapt, and to lead. As you breathe deeply, let that same sense of quiet resilience settle within you. Just as the steppes stretched beyond sight, so too do the possibilities within your own life. The journey of Genghis Khan reminds us that no matter how vast the challenges before us, the human spirit is capable of incredible endurance and transformation. In your mind's eye, picture the endless caravans that travelled the Silk Road under the protection of the Mongol Empire. Merchants from distant lands move steadily along ancient routes, their carts loaded with silks, spices and knowledge. The world is connected in ways it had never been before, ideas flowing freely across continents. These connections, once fragile and uncertain, now weave a tapestry of shared human experience. Genghis Khan's vision brought people together, creating pathways where there had once been barriers. His legacy lives not just in the conquests, but in the bridges he built between cultures, the systems of order he established, and the idea that unity, even amidst diversity, is possible. Now, let your thoughts drift further into the stillness of night. The campfires have burned down to embers, their soft glow casting faint light across the faces of warriors, nomads, and travellers. The air is filled with the faint scent of smoke and the quiet murmur of people at rest. This moment of peace, hard-earned and cherished, reflects the balance that Genghis Khan sought, a world where strength and stability allowed for moments of tranquility. Feel the calm spread through your body, each breath drawing you deeper into a space of comfort and safety. The struggles of the day fall away like grains of sand carried by the wind. You're part of a larger story, one where each challenge you face shapes you, where every moment of resilience adds to your strength. Like the great Khan, you possess the power to endure, to dream, and to create a legacy of your own. Imagine now the vast plain stretching out beneath a sky filled with stars. The universe seems infinite, yet there is a profound sense of peace in knowing that you are a part of this grand expanse. The wind whispers gently, carrying with it the stories of the past, the hopes of the present, and the dreams of the future. You're connected to this timeless flow, your spirit at ease, your heart steady. As your mind drifts further into sleep, let the essence of Genghis Khan's story remain with you. His life, shaped by hardship and triumph, reminds us that within every challenge lies an opportunity for growth. His journey from a boy abandoned on the steppes to a ruler who united vast lands is a testament to the power of determination and vision. You too carry that same potential within you, the ability to overcome, to rise and to transform. The world outside grows softer now, the edges of reality blurring as you surrender to rest. Your breath is slow, steady, and calm. Each inhale fills you with a sense of possibility. Each exhale releases any tension you've been holding. The night wraps around you like a warm cloak, protecting and soothing you as you drift further into peaceful sleep. As you drift even deeper into the embrace of sleep, the vast plains of history stretch endlessly before you, serene and timeless. The gentle rhythm of your breath mirrors the calm, steady winds of the Mongolian steppes, whispering stories of courage, resilience, and transformation. The journey of Genghis Khan lingers softly in your mind, a reminder that every challenge faced, every hardship overcome, shapes the path towards something greater. In this peaceful expanse, the world feels limitless. The night sky, filled with an infinite sea of stars, reflects the boundless potential within you. Each star glimmers with a quiet brilliance, a beacon of possibility, hope, and the dreams that lie waiting beyond the horizon. Just as Genghis Khan dared to look beyond the confines of his world, you too are capable of breaking through barriers, of envisioning new paths, of creating a life defined by your own resilience and purpose. Imagine the quiet of the ancient world. No city lights, no noise of modern life, just the pure, unbroken silence of the night. The grass beneath you is soft, cool and fragrant. The air is crisp, carrying the scent of earth and distant fires. The only sounds are the faint rustling of the wind and the occasional soft nicker of a horse standing watch. This tranquility is a gift, a space where you can let go, breathe deeply, and allow your mind to float freely. As you inhale, draw in a sense of calm strength. With each exhale, release the burdens of the day, the worries that cling like shadows. In this space, there is no need to rush, no need to struggle. You are safe, held gently by the vastness of history and the quiet wisdom it offers. Like the open steppes, your mind expands, free from constraints, filled with possibility. The story of Genghis Khan is one of transformation. of a young boy who endured pain and loss, but who rose to become a leader who reshaped the world. His journey reminds us that strength is born in moments of adversity, that the spirit is forged in the fires of challenge. His vision was clear, his resolve unbreakable, and within you too lies that same seed of potential, that same capacity for growth, for vision, for resilience. Picture the endless plains bathed in the soft glow of dawn. The first rays of sunlight touch the horizon, casting a warm golden light over the land. The sky shifts from deep indigo to gentle hues of pink and orange. The world awakens slowly, peacefully, as the night gives way to a new day. This transition from darkness to light is a symbol of hope, a reminder that no matter how long the night may seem, the dawn always comes. Let this thought settle gently in your mind. Just as the night must yield to the morning, every struggle you face, every challenge you endure holds the promise of renewal, of new beginnings, of possibilities yet to be realized. The journey of life, like the journey of Genghis Khan, is one of cycles, of hardship and triumph, of darkness and light, of endings and new beginnings. Feel your body relax even further, each muscle letting go, your mind sinking deeper into the comfort of sleep. The weight of the world lifts away, leaving you light, free, and at peace. The winds of the steppes, the vast horizons, and the quiet strength of history envelop you in a cocoon of serenity. In this state of deep relaxation, know that you are part of something timeless. The struggles, the victories, the dreams of those who came before you live on, whispering their wisdom and encouragement. You are connected to this greater tapestry of humanity, a thread woven through the fabric of time, resilient and unbroken. William Shakespeare was born in the spring of 1564 in the small town of Stratford-upon-Avon, England. Though the exact date of his birth is not known, tradition holds it to be April 23rd. The streets of Stratford were quiet, lined with timber-framed houses, their white plaster walls crisscrossed by dark wooden beams. The gentle flow of the River Avon had meandered through the town, reflecting the sky in its soft, rippling waters. William was the third child of John Shakespeare, a glove maker and local merchant, and Mary Arden, who came from a respected farming family. Their home on Henley Street was modest, but comfortable, filled with the sense of leather and parchment from his father's work. In those early days, William's world was shaped by the sounds of bustling markets, church bells, and the hum of conversation among townsfolk. The air in Stratford was filled with the rhythms of everyday life, the changing seasons, and the echoes of a world on the brink of cultural awakening. As a boy, William likely spent time exploring the fields and woods beyond the town, where wildflowers bloomed and the calls of birds filled the air. He may have wandered along the banks of the Avon, his curious eyes taking in the flowing water, the shifting light, and the small wonders of nature. William attended the King's New School, where he received a solid education in reading, writing, and classical literature. He studied the works of Roman poets like Ovid and playwrights like Plautus and Seneca. These ancient stories of gods, heroes, and tragic fates ignited his imagination, giving him a foundation that would later blossom into his own masterpieces. The days at school were long, filled with the scratch of quills on parchment, the low hum of Latin recitations, and the occasional creak of wooden benches. William learned not only the rules of language, but also the power of storytelling, the ability to capture the human experience in words. When William was 18, he married Anne Hathaway, a farmer's daughter who lived in a small cottage outside of Stratford. Their marriage was a quiet affair, held in the local church, surrounded by family and friends. A year later, they welcomed their first child, Susanna, followed by twins, Hamnet and Judith. The small house they shared was filled with the sounds of children's laughter and the simple comforts of family life. Yet, even as a young man with a family, William's mind seemed to yearn for something more. Somewhere within him, the seeds of creativity were beginning to sprout. By the late 1580s or early 1590s, Shakespeare left Stratford and made his way to London, a city alive with energy, opportunity, and artistic expression. London in the 1590s was a place of contrasts, cobblestone streets filled with carriages, merchants selling their wares, and the hustle and bustle of a growing metropolis. It was a city where theatres were becoming centres of cultural life, drawing people from all walks of society. Amidst this vibrant chaos, William Shakespeare found his place in the world of theatre. He began his career as an actor and playwright, with a company called the Lord Chamberlain's Men. His early plays were performed in small theatres, where audiences gathered in the dim light, eager to be transported by stories of love, betrayal, and adventure. The scent of burning tallow candles filled the air, mingling with the excited whispers of the crowd. Shakespeare's talent quickly became evident, and his works began to captivate London's theatre-goers. His early successes included plays like Henry VI and Titus Andronicus, stories of war, revenge, and political intrigue. Each line he wrote seemed to pulse with life, filled with the richness of human emotion and the beauty of language. By the late 1590s, Shakespeare had become a respected figure in the theatre world. He purchased shares in the newly built Globe Theatre, a wooden structure that would become the heart of his creative endeavours. The Globe stood on the southern bank of the River Thames, its thatched roof and open-air stage welcoming thousands of eager spectators. It was here that some of his greatest plays came to life: Romeo and Juliet, A Midsummer Night's Dream, and The Merchant of Venice. These stories of a young love, magical realms, and complex human relationships resonated with audiences who laughed, wept, and marvelled at the tales unfolding before them. As his reputation grew, so did the depth of his work. In the early 1600s, Shakespeare wrote some of his most profound and powerful tragedies: Hamlet, Othello, King Lear, and Macbeth. These plays explored the darker corners of the human soul, delving into themes of ambition, jealousy, madness, and fate. Imagine the dimly lit stage, the flicker of candlelight, the hushed anticipation of the crowd as the curtain rose. The words of Shakespeare filled the air, weaving a tapestry of emotion, drama, and insight that would echo through the centuries. Even as he found success in London, Shakespeare never lost his connection to Stratford-upon-Avon. He returned frequently to his hometown, where he purchased New Place, one of the largest houses in the town. It was a place of peace and reflection, a retreat from the bustling world of the theatre. As he entered the later years of his life, his writing took on a gentler tone. Plays like The Tempest and The Winter's Tale spoke of forgiveness, redemption, and the passage of time. These final works reflected a man who had seen much of life's beauty and sorrow, and who sought peace and understanding. On April 23, 1616, at the age of 52, William Shakespeare passed away in his hometown of Stratford-upon-Avon. His life had been a journey of words, stories, and imagination, a journey that left an indelible mark on the world. He was buried in the chancel of Holy Trinity Church, and where his gravestone still rests today. As you breathe deeply now, let the story of William Shakespeare settle gently into your mind. His legacy lives on, in every play, every sonnet, and every line that continues to inspire generations. His words remind us of the beauty of language, the complexity of the human experience, and the power of storytelling. William Shakespeare's life was one of continuous growth, creativity, and exploration. Even though he left the world far too early at the age of 52, his legacy continued to flourish long after his death. His works were not confined to his own time. They transcended generations, cultures, and continents, shaping the world of literature, theatre, and language in ways no one could have predicted. In the years following his passing, Shakespeare's fellow actors and friends, John Hemingway and Henry Condell, took on the task of preserving his work. They compiled and published the first folio in 1623, a collection that ensured his plays would be remembered and performed for centuries to come. This remarkable volume contained 36 of his plays, including comedies, histories, and tragedies, preserving works that may otherwise have been lost. Without the dedication of these friends, some of Shakespeare's most beloved works, such as Macbeth and The Tempest, might never have reached us. Thanks to this labour of love, his stories endured, spreading far beyond the theatres of London to inspire future generations of readers, actors, and writers. Shakespeare's influence on the English language is unparalleled. He coined or popularised thousands of words and phrases, many of which are still in use today, Expressions like break the ice, wild goose chase, and heart of gold can all be traced back to his plays. His ability to capture human emotion and experience in words gave the language a richness and expressiveness that endures. His works reflected the human condition in all its complexity, the joys, the sorrows, the triumphs, and the tragedies. Shakespeare's characters were not just figures on a stage, but living, breathing reflections of humanity. They spoke of love, ambition, betrayal, and redemption with a clarity that resonated across time. Imagine Romeo and Juliet, young lovers torn apart by the feud of their families, speaking words that echo the passions and heartbreaks of every generation. Picture Hamlet, the introspective prince, grappling with questions of life, death, and morality. Think of King Lear, an old man facing the consequences of his pride and folly, or Macbeth, driven to ruin by ambition and fate. These stories were not just meant to entertain. They were designed to make audiences think, feel, and understand themselves and the world around them. In Shakespeare's time, the theatre was a place where the barriers of class and status melted away, where the common folk and the nobility could come together to share in the experience of a story. The Globe Theatre, with its thatched roof and wooden beams, echoed with the laughter, tears and applause of audiences who saw their lives reflected on stage. Shakespeare understood that stories had the power to unite people, to reveal truths, and to inspire change. In his quieter moments, Shakespeare returned to Stratford-upon-Avon, where he enjoyed the peace of his family home. Here, he could escape the noise of the city and the demands of the theatre. He tended to his affairs and spent time with his family and walked the familiar streets of his hometown. But even in retirement, the creative spark never truly left him. Later years, he collaborated with younger playwrights and continued to refine his craft. The serenity of Stratford offered him a chance to reflect on his life's work, to find peace in the knowledge that he had given the world something timeless and extraordinary. Though his life ended on April 23, 1616, his impact was only just beginning. Over the centuries, Shakespeare's works were performed in countless theatres, translated into every major language, and adapted into countless forms. His stories found new life in operas, films, novels, and modern reinterpretations that brought his characters into new settings and contexts. Generations of actors, from humble players to celebrated stars, found their voices through Shakespeare's words. Directors reimagined his plays in endless ways, setting them in modern cities, distant futures, and war-torn landscapes. Each interpretation shed new light on his timeless themes. In schools and universities, students continue to explore his plays, discovering the brilliance and depth of his writing. His sonnets, with their delicate beauty and insight into the nature of love and time, continue to touch the hearts of readers across the globe. Shakespeare's legacy is not just in the pages of books or on the stages of theatres. It lives in the way we use language, the way we tell stories, and the way we understand ourselves. His genius lies in his ability to capture the full spectrum of human experience, from the lightest moments of comedy to the darkest depths of tragedy. As you lie here, feeling the weight of sleep gently pressing upon you, know that Shakespeare's story is one of inspiration, creativity, and boundless imagination. He reminds us that even the simplest beginnings can lead to extraordinary journeys, that the world is full of stories waiting to be told, and that words have the power to change hearts and minds. Allow his life story to guide you into a restful slumber, where dreams unfold like the scenes of a play, filled with wonder, beauty, and endless possibility. Let the words of the past wrap around you like a soft blanket, comforting and timeless. As we continue to reflect on the life and legacy of William Shakespeare, his story weaves a rich tapestry of creativity, resilience, and timeless brilliance. Though the world around him changed, his works remained steadfast, a beacon of human expression that endured across centuries. The years following his death saw a gradual rise in recognition, as scholars, actors, and audiences began to understand the profound impact of his words. In the decades after his passing, you have the first folio published in 763, 1623 by his friends and fellow actors, secured his place in history. This collection ensured that plays like Macbeth, The Tempest, Twelfth Night, and Julius Caesar would be preserved and shared with future generations. Each of these works held a mirror to society, reflecting the complexities of human nature, politics, and morality. As time went on, Shakespeare's works spread beyond the shores of England. Travelling troupes of actors performed his plays across Europe, carrying his stories to new audiences. By the 18th century, his influence had reached the far corners of the world, with translations bringing his words to new languages and cultures. The universality of his themes, love, ambition, betrayal, and redemption, resonated with people from all walks of life. His birthplace, Stratford-upon-Avon, slowly became a place of pilgrimage for lovers of literature and theatre. Visitors walked the same cobblestone streets, passed by the same riverbanks, and stood in the same rooms where Shakespeare once lived. The small town grew into a symbol of creativity and artistic heritage, forever linked to the legacy of its most famous son. As the centuries progressed, Shakespeare's plays were studied in schools, performed in grand theatres, and adapted for new media. Actors found endless opportunities to breathe life into his characters, from the tragic figures of Hamlet and King Lear to the comedic brilliance of Much Ado About Nothing and A Midsummer Night's Dream. Directors reimagined his stories in modern settings, on battlefields, in boardrooms, and in far-off galaxies, proving that his themes remained ever relevant. His influence on the arts is immeasurable. Painters depicted scenes from his plays in rich, vibrant canvases. Composers like Felix Mendelssohn and Giuseppe Verdi turned his works into operas and orchestral pieces. Poets and writers drew inspiration from his words, finding new ways to explore the human experience. In the 19th century, Shakespearean festivals began to emerge, celebrating his works with performances, lectures, and readings. The Royal Shakespeare Company, founded in the 20th century, became a beacon for the continued performance and exploration of his plays. The dedication to his work ensured that his stories remained alive, evolving with each new interpretation and performance. Shakespeare's works also found a home in cinema, with directors like Laurence Olivier, Kenneth Branagh, and Baz Luhrmann bringing his plays to the silver screen. Films adapted from his plays reached audiences around the world, introducing his characters and stories to new generations. The power of cinema allowed his words to take on new dimensions, with stunning visuals and powerful performances amplifying their emotional depth. Even in the modern world, his influence persists. Expressions he penned over 400 years ago are part of everyday language. When someone speaks of wearing their heart on their sleeve, or describes a task as a wild goose chase, they are echoing Shakespeare's voice. His ability to capture the human condition ensured that his words would forever be woven into the fabric of our lives. As you lie comfortably, breathing gently, imagine the quiet streets of Stratford-upon-Avon, bathed in the soft glow of twilight. Picture the river Avon flowing peacefully, its surface shimmering with the last rays of the setting sun. The breeze carries the faint scent of blooming flowers, and the world slows to a tranquil hush. Let the image of a young William with eyes full of wonder and curiosity fill your mind. See him wandering the countryside, dreaming of the stories he would one day tell. His journey reminds us that creativity, passion, and perseverance can shape a legacy that outlives us all. Allow these thoughts to soothe you, like the gentle turning of pages in an old book. The weight of history and the timeless beauty of Shakespeare's words settle around you, a comforting presence that whispers of endless possibilities. As sleep draws you deeper, know that you are connected to a rich lineage of dreamers, thinkers, and storytellers. The same stories that moved audiences in Shakespeare's time continue to resonate today, bridging the gap between past